One of my buddies bought a computer for Black Friday 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. Got a i7, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 SSD for $350 with Windows 11.
Yep.
I'm about to have to replace my my Lenovo.
Brand new.
Alex, back end says that your mic might be a little low. You might want to check it before coming back in. Ew.
Bee bug. Oh, there's a bee head. Ooh, look underneath the bee.
That's been in Windows for a billion years, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's the 3D viewer. It's been around. Actually, it's been in so long they've deprecated it and pulled it out of the. You have to load it. They don't put it in the menu now.
Yes, but somehow the augmented reality experience is always there for no good reason.
It's back when 3D paint and 3D, everything was going to be a big deal, and then it disappeared.
Thanks for adding your questions in. We always have room for more if you want to get in there. And
how did we get questions on transforming theater?
The panelists are here to answer and vote on them, so everybody can vote. Feel free to vote. That'll allow us to prioritize what we answer.
Refresh your view.
There
Somebody just.
There you go. He fixed it. The back end boys. The group.
That was interesting. I thought we only got messages from the host, but apparently the back end can say hi also. Now, I like that, Courtney. That is cool.
Yeah, I had the wrong time on it. I had to back time it. That would have been better.
Where's the refreshment stand?
It's in the kitchen.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media production. Our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about raster versus vector. What are they? What are raster? What are raster-based graphics and vector-based graphics? We're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about how we use them, and we're going to talk about sometimes how to get back and forth between them. So stay tuned for that. And if you've got questions about rasters and vectors, then go ahead and throw those into Makana. And if you've got general questions about digital media production, virtual meetings, and event production, go ahead and throw those into Makana as well. And let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Mitchell, what do we have?
Jumping away. Thank you, Alex. First in, Paul Wallace from Austin, Texas, asking, yesterday, Alex said that the number one thing he's working on now in AI was getting clips from the Office Hours show on YouTube. And I think you referenced these two tools. Are these the ones? And there's two links to them.
Yeah, those are the ones we're testing. Yeah, so I don't know if they're going to be the winners or not, but there are so many apps out there right now that do everything you can imagine with AI. So we're just getting started, but I think a lot of times for me to learn something, I need to have a mission. I need to have, this has to get done. I'm not very good at academic, like let's play with AI, like I don't really have, so I usually am trying to get something done. And this seemed like a good one to work on. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Jack has been playing with the thing, and John might know what it's called. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's Opus. We've been using it for a long time. Yeah.
Opus, same thing. Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah.
So my take on it as an editor is I can't look at it and not want to change it. I just can't. I mean,
well,
every time there's something, I was like, eh.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One is all I'm trying to do is something very mechanical. Like, so I'm not trying to have it recut something or cut a highlight reel or do anything special. All I wanted to do is take all the questions from the first hour and cut them up into individual files. Like that's all. It's a very, very simple mission. The complicated part is having it get it right, so that when I say the next question, which right now, if I did that, then I would screw it up. But I say the magic word, and it will. The idea is that it will cut right after I say next question to right before I say the next question, so that way I just end up with no next questions, and I just end up with the person asking the question. And so that's the goal, is to figure that out. And so if we can figure that out, what it means is that we can put up stuff on YouTube, and I can have a playlist that's just constantly building of all those questions. So instead of having a the little time markers that we have in the video, we might have those for the second hour, but for the first hour, just imagine they're just all individual files. And if someone wants to share one or do whatever they want or save it, they don't have to save the whole show. They just save the questions that they want or the answers that they want. Also, we could have multiple playlists. So we could have a playlist that is just the chronological answers, but we could have audio answers and video answers and everything else, and break them up. So if you just want to listen to one segment of it or one that kind of thing, and it'll be easier for other people to build their own playlists with it as well. So I think that it's really not designed as I think a lot of people are using these as like, how do I make it more social and how do I repackage my stuff? I'm just trying to make it easier for folks watching Office Hours to organize the answers, and questions together. And so it's a relatively simple thing that we're trying to get done. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I was thinking about when we were talking about next question misfires as part of a question being answered, or somebody just says something close to it. Couldn't we teach the AI to recognize the host's voice and identify the host, and when only the host says next question?
Yeah,
that's
so
where it goes.
These are all the things that I think that we can do. I just don't know if it's all, the idea is if it sets markers. Like one of the things that Ken and I were talking about was the possibility of building either a chat GPT, just building a plugin that will do this. There are a couple of things that may build EDLs. And so we could have it build an EDL. That way it would just pop up and someone could look at it for just a second and make some fine adjustments. But yeah, looking at a single track and making the decisions, like it could, for instance, build the cut list based on just the track from the host. So it would just listen to that track and build the cut list there. That way, no matter what anybody else says, it's just listening to that for that edit, and then it applies to the whole thing. So one of the things I was thinking about, and again, my imagination of what it can do and what it can do is probably different currently, but that's usually how we get somewhere, is to think about where it could go and then try to figure out how to push it there. So I think that you could also have it be activated by the reader, so that it would listen for next question and then it would just cut to right before the reader starts saying something. So and you can end up with a relatively clean edit that way. And so anyway, so I think that there's a bunch of tools, and I think these tools will, obviously get more interesting as we go. But us trying to figure these things out and making requests have pushed a lot of software forward. so us thinking about something outlandish and then trying to make it happen is how we kind of help push things into the next, to where they want to go next. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I'm not in a hurry to get myself out of work here, but wouldn't it be cool if everybody could put a voice print to AI, and when the question is asked, it's done in the voice of the person that asked the question?
Yeah, we've thought about that. We've definitely thought about the idea that you could have people have their own, and I think that it wouldn't be out of the question to have that actually happen. I think that what would also be interesting is to use AI so people could ask the questions. You could have people ask the questions and have it convert those questions to text. So the AI converts so the question is not something they typed out. It's something that the hard part for that is that it'll be hard if they ask a long question because they'll run out of room. But the idea is that they just, or maybe it says you got 5 seconds or whatever, but what if it took that question and then converted it to text so that we can see it and people can vote on it? So that text is there. And then, but when we get to that question, we hit play, so that you hear them actually asking that question. Of course, it would also have to decide, is the audio quality good enough and everything else. The real challenge with that is, but you could definitely do a voice print as well. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, doesn't the question, I haven't done the back end, so maybe I'm off base here, but doesn't the question manager in Makana in the show hit a button which brings up the large panel for the question reader? Couldn't that just capture the time code at that point and put it into a bookmark list for YouTube?
That's how it's done right now. So we have an output of those that there. The problem really is that we do it so what happens is someone finishes the question and I just go next question, and oftentimes there'll be idiosyncrasies where the question doesn't move as fast as I said it.
Question manager goes, whoa, he said next question. Right.
Yeah. And so it's pretty close, and we probably could pull it off. But if we really wanted it to be clean, I think you'd want to analyze the audio to make that actually happen. Now there's another possibility of it being minimally impactful, which is that it builds an EDL of where it thinks they all are. Because the other thing that you do want to do is refer potentially back via time code to what the question was typed, and then put that into the title or summarize it and put it use AI to build a little title for it and then push it out. We're trying to figure out how to make it completely automated so that it's not, that we have it. And again, we don't need to do anything. We can keep going the way we've been going and it'll just be fine. It's just that we, it's a game that we're playing.
And then we can have ChatGPT do the answers with little avatars of the panelists.
Yeah, we could have a ChatGPT. What we could do is if we get stumped or even just have ChatGPT, we could have what we're missing here is the ChatGPT operator. So someone in the background that can raise their hand as ChatGPT for questions.
It's like beat the clock.
And we just go Chris and then Mitchell, and then we go, let's listen to ChatGPT thinks they have an answer, and they hit it, and ChatGPT says it, and we probably give it Chris's voice and have it say it sarcastically.
It probably wouldn't hallucinate any more than we do.
Exactly. Go ahead, Chris.
What makes you think that hasn't been happening for a long time?
You think that's Fenwick you're talking to? Come on.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asking, one selling point of IMAX film is the 18K resolution. How would you ingest and process resolution that high in a modern video effects pipeline? Even Apple ProRes only supports 8K.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, Douglas, resolution isn't everything. The way you do it is you would compress it, do lossless compression, intra-frame compression on each frame. That's how it's done now. And where you can, preserve that resolution. But the bigger problem than the resolution is the color depth and the dynamics, the ability to capture light over a broader range, which film really can't hold up to. That IMAX film 18K film is not as good at capturing a broad range of contrast as a digital sensor. Even though the digital sensor is only 8K, the digital sensor is going to look better because it has a broader contrast range and can work in more lighting situations than that film can at 18K. And that the reason 18K looks better than 35 or regular 70 is because there's more pixels and meaning more light. It has a larger capture area and can average out when printed down. It can give you a little more contrast range, but that's not the main problem. Is not resolution. It's color depth and contrast range.
Right, and generally what happens is the films are scanned, and so if it was if it's scanned actually at 18K, then it can be. I don't know what scanner would do that. To be honest with you, I think that it would be a very for those things. I don't know if most of the film scanners I know I have to look at that.
Yeah, they just put a different gate in the machine. It's all set up to do 70 millimeter scanning.
Right.
They just, so just going through sideways. They just change the aperture frame. So.
Right. Yeah. So when they scan it, when they scan that out, it just comes out as frames, raw frames. So you just get these frame sequences that are rendered out. And then I think that the maximum resolution in Resolve is 32K. So there's some headroom there. So as far as color grading, it can still go into Resolve, which most films go through at least at the end. And then the compositing tools that they use, Nuke and others, are definitely capable of very high resolutions. I don't know, 32K probably at least. They're designed to kind of handle that. So where they do the compositing itself, in a program and the most common one in the industry is Nuke for that level of compositing. So I don't think that they have any problem with the resolution, as Courtney said, and the color, all that stuff would probably be managed in Resolve. It would take, it's one of the reasons if you when they say when Christopher Nolan says that they use mostly practical effects, one reason to not use too many virtual visual effects, which there were still a lot used. But you have to be careful of them because the render times will be very, very long. These are massive render times at that resolution. But what's interesting about it is really shooting. We talked about this a little yesterday, but I think that when you're a director at a level that you're really going to create something visually stunning, I think it's also nice to know that you can record it in something that's probably going to be have a long lifespan of looking really, really sharp. So I think that's part of the advantage of shooting in IMAX. Next question.
Let's make today Show Your Calculator Day. If you have a classic, let's see it.
Okay. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'll start out. There it is.
Your calculator. Yeah, there you go. I have a calculator on my phone and on my computers, but I don't have any. I don't think a lot of us have calculators.
Preto's got one. He's got one handy there.
Where is it, Preto? Is it within arm's reach?
You got a TI, my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Where's that abacus that used to always be?
Yeah, exactly.
It's back here.
Yeah, someone's got to have an old TI somewhere. So
no, I got an HP 41CX.
There we go. Next question.
Next one.
Do you have it? Wait, I would have screwed up the system. See, let's see it. Oh, here there it is. Pulls it out. Look at that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's got the hard drive attachment to the top.
Yeah. I think I had that one at some point too.
John.
What's that?
That's
12
awesome.
bits?
It's reverse Polish notation. There's no equal sign. Right. So
Right.
it works like a standard assembly language programming. So you enter into a register and then you do an operand onto the register.
That's awesome.
So 10 enter 5 times.
That's awesome. Yeah. I had one I think I might have had that one a long time ago, and my uncle had a TI, and he let me play with it, but only when he was around because it was very expensive. I was like 6 or 7 or something like that. Next question.
From Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina, is there a good resource to learn about blend modes in programs like After Effects? It's got a static color image and elect to blend a black and white animation to increase the luminosity of the highlights like a pulsing neon.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Wow, there's a ton of things. I mean, blend effects or modes have been around Adobe a very, very long time. So if you're used to using Photoshop or even After Effects, it's one of the classics. Many YouTube videos that can help you out there. It's a useful and often misunderstood program, or part of a program, because you just forget it's there.
Yeah, one of the best ways to do it is if you, I got to say that there is a resource that I don't know if it exists anymore. It was funny. There was a very early on, I think book number 1 or book number 2 on Photoshop was written by a friend of mine named David B. Edney. And David wrote this book, and he was just the person I'd always ask if I had questions about Photoshop. And he, another friend of mine who came up for PixelCore to talk about how blend modes work, built a Photoshop document where you could change things like the curves, and it would show you everything about how it affects it, or you could change something else and it would show you how it affected the curves, like how it affected the image. It was, and David looked at me and he said, "That's the most technical Photoshop document I've ever seen built." And that person now works at a big company down in Cupertino, managing stuff down there. But it was the most. It would do exactly what you're asking, which is that you could see all the blend modes, and as you changed any setting anywhere, it showed how it affected it, and the curve levels. It was an amazing document, and we kept it around. I lost it somewhere in some computer move somewhere. I probably couldn't open it now either. It's probably done in Photoshop 5.5 or 6. But it would show you those things. To make a short answer very long, what you're probably looking for is add or screen. If you're doing that and you're flickering that, a screen mode will probably take you pretty far down that path. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I was just thinking that a frequent office hours visitor is Trish Meyer, and Trish and her husband Chris have done quite a few books on there. So I would do a search on that. They literally wrote the book on After Effects.
And a lot of times what I do is I put gradients over top of things. So I take an image and I put a gradient. I make a gradient that's like a strip of a gradient over top of an image. And then I just start scrolling through them, because what I can see is what the gradient does to the image across its band. So if you just take like a little like eighth of the image right across the middle or whatever you're trying to affect, and then start running through it, you'll start to see how it's affecting those things. And so I have to admit that interactively, that's usually how I figure out what I want to use. Next question.
Jack Rupel in Breckenridge, Colorado asks, where does low frequency affect in your audio work? Atmos, highlight, right channels? I'm just trying to figure out, what is that, height, right?
Yeah, so the LFE is the low frequency. So that usually is, it depends on the system, but I think it's typically 80 hertz or below. And it's really something that it's designed for you to feel more than hear. So it's below what you're really listening to, and you're feeling it. Now, there's a couple different ways that gets managed. In an iMac system, for instance, it's mixed into the LFE, or that bass is being mixed in from the other channels. But a lot of times we have discrete control over those channels. So when you see a 5.1, that's 5 positional channels, and then the LFE is, and if you 5.2 means you got 2 of them. It might be stereo bass, which would be, and subwoofer and LFE are not, they're not interchangeable. They're similar, but so anyway, so those are the things that and it usually is something fairly large, because it's got to move a lot of air to make that actually work. But when you see, but you definitely don't use it in the height channels. The height channels are, and so if you see a 514 or 714, 916, those types of things, that's how the first number is what's going around the horizontal. The next number is the LFE, and the last number is the height channels. So those are that tells you what channels you're looking at in Atmos or in just a channel based operation. Typically, it is left, right, center, LFE, and then left surround, right surround. That's 5. And so then you add 2 more for the back for 7, and then you split that for 9. But the LFE is typically 1, but not always. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and it's at those lower frequencies, they're pretty non-directional. You can't tell where it's coming from. So usually there's some very, very large drivers that are at the base of the screen, not behind the screen, because they'd shake the screen too much. And They're behind the proscenium at the base of the screen. Usually it's where they place them in a movie theater. But as to where it's positioned in Atmos, I guess it doesn't really matter. It's a separate channel.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas has a question. Google co-founder Sergey Brin has returned to Google a la Steve Jobs to save them from an existential crisis with AI. Can they keep up with Microsoft and OpenAI?
Good, John.
They don't need saving. They acquired DeepMind. DeepMind was founded in 2010, and they have probably the most advanced AI technology on the planet. Google's sitting on the biggest portfolio of AI on the planet. They just didn't release it because they were worried about the social repercussions. Microsoft, they were forced by Microsoft to release all their product. I've been getting better results on Bard than GPT-4 lately, so they're doing fine, Paul. Thanks.
I think it's more that he's just interested. like finally they're doing something that he's interested in. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, my experience, limited as it is this kind of a change could be a really good thing. It's probably a good thing because, but I'm thinking of it more in terms of its stock. I think this will, in this, the stock market is a little bit about math, but a lot of it is about the sentiment of the buyer, of the shareholder, and something like this can restore a lot of faith in a company. If you look at the history of stocks that have gone through the return of CEOs, and Apple's just one of them, you can kind of see it's like, oh, we got a new CEO, went up, and then it went down because people were disillusioned, and then the original CEO comes back, and it's like it restores people's faith in the company. There's no, you can't take away that kind of need for the brand. Like, people need to believe and trust in the people that they're investing in.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they what he does there. But I think that it's a good time. I do think that it's more that he's fascinated by it than they're in trouble. So it's really, when you understand how Google AdWords work, it's like looking into the sun. Like it is, they just print money with that because it's so effective. And so it's just really, they have something that's generating a lot of revenue, and I don't think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be shaken anytime soon, but I think he's more interested in it. I think he was just bored with what, I think the hard part with Google was very early on, they came up with something that made a lot of money. I mean, the AdWords. They haven't been, other than YouTube and a couple other things, they haven't been that successful at doing anything else. Like, they just keep on throwing things at the wall, but they can quit those things and they can let them go because they're not part of their core revenue, which is AdWords. So I think that's the big thing. But yeah, as has been stated before, if you look at everybody using Gmail and in all of the search items and all the returns, I mean, the database that Bard has is intense. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, an Oregon festival will be the first ever to use a hydrogen-powered fuel cell to power stages. Does this tech have a future in our industry?
Good, Courtney.
Well, I don't know about our industry. I mean, you can get it right now. Go out and buy you the 2023 Toyota Mirai. It's been out for a number of years. Powered by hydrogen fuel cell. Converts hydrogen into electricity, which drives electric motors in the car. Just pull the engine out of that thing, and you can use it to power all your equipment in your house. Of course, it's kind of hard to get a hydrogen truck to deliver to your house, so that's a bit of the problem. There's not a wide place to plug these things in. The Mirai has the problem. They've been trying to sell this thing. It's $50,000 for years. The only byproduct is water. But the problem is you have to fuel it at a hydrogen fueling station, which are few and far between. So the only places they sell those cars to are people that have fleets of cars and can put a huge hydrogen tank in on their fleet lot somewhere, and all the cars come back to one place every night so that they can be refueled. Other than that, you have a hard time using something like that. In today's infrastructure, it just doesn't support hydrogen.
Good, Mitchell.
I think it'll be a great future for it, considering it's the most abundant element in the cosmos.
Good, Chris. Can't hear you, Chris.
I think hydrogen is hard to transport safely. There's a hydrogen station on our way to when I take my wife to work, and she asked me one day. She goes, "What is that?" I go, "Don't ask. You don't need to know." But there is one in Berkeley.
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard to compete. I understand the argument. There's an argument for hydrogen that it's technically better. I fear that it's the Betamax of energy, which is that the VHS is just electricity, it's just batteries. VHS was clearly not better than Betamax, but it won on a couple other things in some usage areas that kept it really busy.
How about Super VHS though?
Yeah, it was just. I mean, the whole format was not as good as Beta, but anyway. I think that this one is over. I mean, I think that we're moving towards batteries, and we're not gonna. I mean, we still got some gas for a while, but I mean, obviously the trajectory is to use to go to a more battery operated or less car operated in general. Go ahead, John.
I just have a one-word comment: Hindenburg.
There we go. That's what everyone thinks about when they think about hydrogen. They're like, well, next question.
Next question from Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado. Filming with QCam Ego. Left and right images are produced. I am trying to use a gimbal so that the full resolution may be recorded. Thoughts?
I still think that when you look at the QCam is a stereo 180 camera, I believe, and I still think that you should really consider trying not to move it very much. Really think about what how you're producing that. We've done a lot of 360 and 180 where you're moving and it makes people queasy, and it doesn't matter whether you stabilize it or not. I've used a full Steadicam with an Ozo, and it doesn't matter whether you've stabilized it or not. It makes people queasy because you're moving and their inner ear can't feel it, but their eyes see it. And it's not a great experience for most people. So you just want to really think about whether you want to move things in a 180 experience. Usually the 180 experience wants to be stationary. So I would really think hard on that. But you could put it on some kind of gimbal. But I don't know. I think that in general, and I think that you probably look at things like the RS3 from DJI is probably the one you want to look at. But again, it's a or RS2 base unit. But I would really think hard about doing it itself. I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, asking, Meta's Llama 2 may have passed the OpenAI as the top AI dog. Discuss.
Go ahead, John.
Paul, you fell for the clickbait again. It does not surpass OpenAI GPT-4, maybe 3.5, and that's a maybe. More importantly, with Llama 2 is the open licensing. And so that's way, way more important. That the LLM looks fantastic. We've been playing with it, and it looks really, really good. And now that the license has changed, we'll see what happens. But it's great. It's going to cause prices to go down because the API for GPT is still very expensive.
And also, when now that we're talking about open, one thing that Jason sent me earlier today was that Apple, NVIDIA, Adobe, I think all got together and really are pushing, and Pixar are pushing the Open USD. So it's not quite not AI, but could be eventually, or could be connected to it. USDZ is the universal scene description with Apple. Pixar built, and Apple has been using USD and USDZ for their AR, and now they're really pushing an alliance to have everyone support USD. Open USD means that it'll be open sourced, and it'll be freely available. This is a typical thing: is you control the things that make you money, and then you try to commoditize everything else. So you're seeing Apple and Adobe and others want this to be something. They want the model generation and model creation to be something that is as close to free as possible. As they build up assets for their VR tools. So it's pretty good. I think it just came out today. Was it today, Jason?
Yeah, it was today.
Yeah. So pretty. That's we're going to keep on seeing more and more. We're going to try to at the bottom of the hour, if there's some news items, go ahead and post those in as we'll send them to me right now, but we'll make it more formal. But at the bottom of the first hour, we'll probably try to give you some updates on anything that was released over the last day in our industry. So stay tuned for more of that. And a quick reminder that, of course, you can ask questions throughout the first hour. So if you've got questions about general media production, obviously some AI or event production, go ahead and throw those into Makana for the first hour. And then, of course, you can ask your questions about vectors and rasters for the second hour. Let's go ahead and jump into the next question.
From Jack Rupel in Breckenridge, Colorado, please discuss diegetic and non-diegetic sounds and when these might mix to height channels, LFE channel.
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay. For those who aren't massive word nerds, diegetic sounds are sounds that the characters on film can hear. So the voice in your head, the narrator, is a diegetic sound. The non-diegetic sound is the stuff like, everything else that would be a sound. So in this case, any time that it belongs, in the 3D plane, in the highers or the lowers, and that's really just a sound designer's choice.
Yeah, people have played with this a little bit. So the idea is that one of the things that you could do, you probably wouldn't use the height channels. Height channels you don't use that much. What you use height channels for typically is to add a little air to something. So you don't because a lot of things don't support it. So it's kind of like one of those things that if you really push at it, people may not get the same experience. And so the height channels are not where you'd put it, but you may put it in the surround or in the rear surrounds, and so the idea is that if you have an inner monologue, you might hear a bunch of things, but you might have an inner monologue that is coming out in the left or the right surround, like, oh, I can't believe he's doing this or whatever. And you could have this, and people have experimented with it. It usually disorients folks. And so it hasn't been that popular, but it is something that is, we've been thinking about using it for interpretation, like putting interpreters in the left or right sound so that you can hear the person speaking in their own language with their own experience, but you can hear someone telling you what they're saying. And so that's the thing we've been kind of playing with. Haven't really mastered it yet, but we're thinking, working towards it. Go ahead, Courtney.
This probably happens the most with music. When people are traveling in a car, you'll hear the music track. It'll cut to the people in the car, and you'll hear the music track going along. And then you realize, well, is this just the score, or is this music playing on the radio? And then they'll turn down the radio, and the music track will go down. And then you go, oh, it's playing on the radio, so they can hear it. But a lot of times you don't. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just the score, and they're having a conversation over the top of the score, and it's not anything the characters can hear. Or a lot of times somebody will take a sound effect, especially in auto scenes, like the tires going over something, and then it'll develop into the score. And I've seen movies where you hear that noise, and you go, what's that noise? Is the car running over something? Especially in interior car scenes. And then you realize, oh no, it's the composer. He has just taken that sound and turned it into the score, and that sound carries over the next scene or something. And then you realize, oh, that's what it is. So it's a mind-bending trick.
The one of the best transitions from one to the other is in Grosse Pointe Blank. He goes into the Unimart, and you can hear the Guns N' Roses have him going in, and as he walks into the store, you hear the soundtrack playing, and then as he walks into the store, it cuts, like he opens the door and it cuts to the music of that song in the store without losing a beat, and it is one of the best audio transitions I've ever. And there was a point where I thought they had taken it out, but I was wrong. I was watching it the other day. I was trying to show somebody that, and I couldn't find it, but it's still there. Yeah, go, Chris.
One of the tricks I do on occasion, I've done this probably too many times, doing corporate, like happy face videos where it's, we're covering a corporate bash at a hotel in Hawaii. Somebody invariably will give me a GoPro shot of somebody going down a water slide into the pool. So you have some completely ripped off pop music playing along, and maybe a little bit of nat sound. It works best if there's not a lot of nat sound at this point. And then as soon as that GoPro hits the water, you crossfade to another version of that same cut of music, mumbled and gargled, and then you fade up all the splashing sounds of the GoPro, and all of a sudden it's like you're listening to the music that they're listening to on the pool deck, but now you're underwater listening to it. and it's really fun. And I do that, and you can always see the room. It's really fun when you do those kind of edits because you get to watch a room react to it.
Yeah.
And there's always a reaction to the underwater trick.
And that's a very good example of a kind of a surprise and delight thing that you might add to a show that you don't need to do. It doesn't tell more of the story. It's not core, but it just surprises people and delights them.
Nobody will think to ask you for it, but when you do it, it's like, oh, how cool.
That's kind of the definition of a surprise and delight moment is the like and just this, just that's what you're trying to create is just like that was really cool, and it wasn't needed. No one thought about, and for larger companies that do a lot of big events, sometimes there's a lot of discussion about how to create those, and you want to create one or two an event oftentimes.
We sent another editor to do that job this year because I don't fly anymore and there's no bridge to Hawaii yet. And so we sent a new guy, and I showed him I go, throw in one of these. They'll love it.
Go ahead, Jason.
If you ever want to see just a masterclass in the transitions between diegetic and non-diegetic sound, watch Baby Driver again. It is truly masterful.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Michael Smith from Silverado, California, USA. Local IMAX 70mm projector is not working, and was wondering if the digital copy would fill the screen as much as the 70mm version.
Good, Courtney.
I don't think so. I think the digital copies are 4K copies, and they're a different aspect ratio than the 2:3 or whatever the 1:3 of the original IMAX is. So they're more rectangular shaped than square shaped. So I think you would see a cropped version in the digital copy.
Good, Chris.
On a side note, I saw a video of somebody receiving the copy of a 70mm or an IMAX film print. It's astonishing how big it is.
Yeah.
Was there a forklift involved?
Yes, there was.
Oh yeah, it's 600 pounds. It's not something you're going to carry around. Yeah, they're huge. I was somewhere where there was a like Pacific Rim IMAX version or whatever, just sitting on a platter, and I just opened it up, and it was just this massive image, and I was just like, oh, I used to hand out when I taught my visual effects class, we would talk about film, and I would hand out, and I lost it a long time ago, but I had a little thing where I had, like the little 8mm, 16mm, Super 35, and then I'd have IMAX. It was like this giant frame, that was there. You really got a sense for the scale. Yeah. The problem is they don't use the 70mm that often, and so the problem, if there's something's not working, you don't find out, and then trying to fix it when you're in a release is challenging. So that's but I do think that the success of Oppenheimer is probably going to lead to more 70mm, films, so I think that, again, you have to remember that in the blockbuster world, there's really only about 10 movies a year. So there's really, 10 movies a year pay for everything, it's been about 10 or 12. It might go down to 5 or 6, but it's typically been 10 or 12 movies pay everybody's way. And the rest of the movies are, you're just hoping that they hold their own and not lose any money. And so when you have something that can fill theaters, people start to pay attention to, how to make profit there. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
It can't be a blockbuster if there's only 13 projectors. You can't sell enough tickets to make it profitable. They're looking at the theaters themselves. Each theater is profitable, though. Each one of those is profitable, and they're very profitable. But if you can, when you shoot a movie in a town and they premiere the film in that town, and half the town's people show up as extras, you can sell out that theater, that one theater in the town that was shot every day. It doesn't make the film profitable.
Well, but the films that have been doing 70mm generally have been profitable. So that's it has to be behind the right directors that can take advantage of it, and there's a process to it. But I think, again, we're getting down to a point where, for a large release, blockbuster release, we're going to get down to about 10 or 12 directors that are allowed to do that. It's not gonna, we're not gonna keep on. The streaming and everything else is kind of taking over. There's not there's not a lot of business in small theaters anymore. Like it's not, unless, you know, because you can watch it at home at a higher quality than you can at a small theater. And that's the real challenge. You know, smaller theaters have to figure out what makes them relevant. But the bigger theaters, I mean, the ones that are the really large theaters, the Dolbys, the IMAXs, those are the ones that are the future of what's going to be left, you know, when the water keeps going up. You know, the sea level of what people can do at home is rising fast, you know, and the problem is an 85-inch TV at $2,000 and a Ambio, Sennheiser Ambio is better than, for most people, will be a better experience than 95% of the theaters out there. So that's the real challenge. Sure, you can get it to a lot of screens right now, but will that last? You know, like if the writer's strike goes through the end of the year, half the screens will go under, like in 2025, because there won't be any movies. You know, there won't. You know, there. You know, the problem is that the streamers are the ones that have to negotiate, and they're going to. If the strike goes to the end of the year, they'll post record profits in the last quarter because they didn't do any production, but they just kept on getting subscriptions. Go ahead, Courtney.
Half the television stations are going to go under because they depend on advertising. And without new television product, they can't sell ads on it. People aren't watching it. But anyway, I think you're misdirecting the causation for the blockbuster with the format of the film. The reason that these blockbuster films that are produced in 70 are popular is because only the directors with huge clout can insist on shooting in IMAX 70 or 70 millimeter.
Right.
Regular. So you're only getting the top cream of the crop directors that want to shoot there. That's why those films are popular, not because of the format, but because of the directors. You're right. The format.
You're absolutely right. It's just that if you look at again, an Oppenheimer as an example, you're 100% right that you have about those but they got that clout by selling a lot of tickets. You know, and so the thing is that they
right, but it's not because that they were producing stuff in 70 millimeters, because they were producing stuff with a good story and
no, 100%. I agree with you. We're taking a little time, everyone. If the producers are wondering, we're taking a little time. We don't have a ton of questions on the hopper, so we can chew on this for a minute. It's good conversation. The issue is that now that 70 millimeter has done really well, what do you think the producers want to do or directors want to do to show that they have the clout? They're all going to be asking for 70 millimeter. Like they're going to go, I want to do I want to do a 70 millimeter because I think that I'm the next Christopher Nolan or the next, you know, like I can do the next Dune or I can do the, you know, so they're going to, you know, this is going to be the new kind of measuring stick, you know, so to speak, of directors, is having the clout to ask for a 70 millimeter film. And so the thing is that this is, you know, this is going to be, you know, and directors do this all the time. They want to do the biggest thing. And now the cool thing on campus is 15 per 70 millimeter, you know, like which we never thought would happen, but it's the cool thing on campus. And I think that you're going to see a harder push for those. And from again, when you look at the individual, the cost of the print is paid off in the first couple of days. If they had left Oppenheimer in the 1570 theaters for another month, they would have made millions and millions and millions of dollars on that, you know, there, because it's just hard sold out. You know, and so they could have added 2, 3, 4 weeks to their schedule. I think that what you're going to end up seeing is less films going through these really big theaters, and have them have longer runs, because they're very, very unusual theaters, you know, to do that. And I think that, again, I think it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the viewers want to see it that way. But if it's making a 90% profit or a 80% profit, who cares? like you know, it's like let's go ahead and do that. And so even after all the extra costs of producing, the cost of film and the cost of the cameras is really such a small number. Like for that kind of film, compared to the actors, the cost of the film and everything else is pretty low. You know, so I think, especially when you look at the actors that were in Oppenheimer, you know, that's the cost of the film is, you know, maybe 1 or 2% of that. So it's really not that big of a change for them to mechanically do it. It feels like a pain to us, but in reference to the entire production of the movie, it's just not that big of a number. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, we've talked about the availability of 70 millimeter 15 perf in IMAX theaters, but what about equipment to shoot it? If two people want to shoot 70 millimeter at the same time, do we have enough gear to outfit them?
You have to remember that the shooting days are usually not that. I mean, they can't overlap, or you just make more cameras. I mean, it's not like you can't make the cameras. But I think that what you're going to see is over the next couple of years, you'll see us grow to probably 3 to 5 movies a year that are in 15 perf. Like, I think that over the next 2 or 3 years, it'll grow to that, because that's the high ground. I mean, everything else, there's no reason to watch. There's no reason to go to a 20-foot or 30-foot or 40-foot screen. Like, there's just no reason to, like a 40 feet and below on a theater is not competitive with an 85-inch monitor and a good surround system at home. Like, it's just not. So the problem is that if you're, and that's like 80% of the screens that are out there are 40 feet or less. And so the water is rising quickly on people not being willing to go in, because now they can get all those movies. I'm watching, what am I watching? Hijack right now. Really well shot movie. I mean, Apple has all the money, but like, and the other thing is it's much longer. Like, I don't want to go see a 2.5 hour film very much anymore. I don't want to go to a 3-hour one in the theater either. I like being able to watch everything in 45-minute bites. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, the infrastructure just isn't there for your dream to happen. That's the problem, is we've moved away from photochemical film processing. There's only 2 or 3 labs left in the world that can process that film and print it. And as we move to digital, the quality of digital gets better. We're just one step away of reproducing the quality of 1570 in digital. So that makes more sense to be able to accommodate that rather than to go backwards in time to a technology of 100 years ago.
Yeah, we're pretty far away.
Moving forward in time to a technology that can advance.
Yeah, I mean, part of my job is to do delivery to theaters, and I got to say that we're pretty far away from 18K. Like, it's a
but it doesn't really make that much difference.
Does it?
Yeah, I have seen the tests. Yes.
Yeah,
it does not make that much difference.
Well, we'll see.
Resolution.
I think we'll just
not make that much difference. And there's a limitation. There's a physical limitation in the production of film stock and the grain size to be able to go much further, to go any further. And you're already at the limit at 1570. So
all right,
you're not going to expand any further.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Next question.
You still have to scan it in, because 90% of every film's out there have visual effects in.
Next question.
And our next question is from Hakan Fors in Stockholm, Sweden. What is your thoughts on the future of live sports broadcasting? Will on-location camera operators go away?
Go ahead, Chris.
I won't say never, but you can't really make an intelligent statement about this until you sit next to a live sports cameraman and watch them work. My favorite example is, I believe it's camera 1, which would be the high first camera in baseball. And if you watch somebody who knows what they're doing at that camera, it's like magic. There's a lot to cover. There's a lot of good things that you can pick up off the field from that position, but you always have to be ready if the pitcher is going to pick off the guy who's trying to lead off of first to steal second. So that shot always has to be there, but a good camera 1 operator in baseball is going to sell you a half a dozen other really great views of the stadium, but he always has to be back at that place. And you watch a guy with a manual zoom, which is, in my experience, what most people tend to use in sports, who knows what they're doing, and tell me a computer or somebody remotely operating it can do it. They can't.
The big challenge.
They have to see around the lens.
The big challenge is that for 95% of the work, you can probably get AI to do it better. So the stuff what Chris is talking about is, pro level baseball, football, soccer, basketball, hockey. Those are all things that are not going to be replaced by AI anytime soon. It's all the lower level stuff where you don't have a budget. The budget for,
curling.
The budget for curling, or the budget for like a Pac-12, non-football, event is, $10,000 or $15,000. like it's not that much. And so the thing is that the problem is at that point you can, and the skill of the operators that are getting paid to be part of those, there's a lot of things you could do with computers to do that. The challenge really is how do you end up with people at the top 5% when there's nowhere to learn? There's nowhere to be part of it. And what's going to happen is people are going to have to go into a training process that lasts a lot longer, and they have to come out cooked. And it's going to be harder to get into a lot of these things because the school will actually. There won't be any on-the-job training because those jobs are taken by the AI. You'll have to be in training, to do that, like a doctor or something. It's just going to be much harder. It's going to take time. Like these kind of jobs are going to be very hard to replace with computers for a while, but they will. And then that's the real challenge is training becomes super important because it might last a long time. We have to be very good at it because, you will get better than the computer, but it'll be harder and harder to get better than the computer. Next question. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, real quick. In the old days, talk about training. It's a good point, Alex. In the old days, the training path would be you'd start doing like Jumbotron work at some of the bigger universities, and then you might get into the broadcast or, like local, like campus broadcast. Then you do Jumbotron at the big shows, the big games, and then maybe if the bookers who are hiring all the freelance crews to fill those positions liked you and you got along with people, that you might get put into the truck to do one of the broadcasts.
Yeah. And the challenge is that a lot of the lower level stuff could be done by a computer, and that's going to be hard because it's
you won't get the training ground.
Yeah, exactly. There's nowhere because you just need thousands of hours of doing it to get good as the people you see at the NFL or MLB or whatever. To get as good as those folks takes 10 years, 15 years of where you started in high school games or college games and moved your way up slowly of hard work, talking to other people and really working at it. And only a tiny percentage make it.
And the thing is you can, even if you do really, really well, you can absolutely deep six your career in one game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're ever interested, I will tell you the story of why I don't do sports anymore.
Next question.
Next one in from Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. More than other panelists, Alex's background has a squarish artifact. Is that the camera, video, pipeline, or YouTube?
I don't know what that squarish. Do you guys see it? Do you guys see an artifact?
I don't see it. I have you blown up really big on a 5K display. Your background looks great. Yeah. Josh has to fix his computer.
It could be in YouTube. It could be a YouTube compression artifact. So we should take a look at it. But I can't see it on mine because I see the uncompressed version on my thing. Next question.
Robert Green in Los Angeles. What are we looking forward to at the SIGGRAPH show next week in LA?
Go ahead, John.
Jensen Huang's one of the keynote speakers, CEO of NVIDIA. They're just doing amazing work. Tons of generative AI stuff. I gotta imagine. Hoping to see Gingerbread from Adobe. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think Gingerbread is something that a lot of us are really interested to see how far they went with 3D. So how far are they going? But this is going to be their big. A lot of times it's new releases, so we'll be looking for whether we see a release from Maxon, from Autodesk, from Houdini, from side effects for Houdini. Those are all things that would be interesting for us to see as well. See if there's any updates to Fusion as they relate to Resolve. So those are the kind of things I'm really interested in. Motion capture, and character generation. So the kind of the meta human stuff is something I'm interested in. Go ahead, Chris.
John, the guy from NVIDIA, you think NVIDIA still has runway in terms of like its growth potential?
You're asking for stock tips?
Maybe. I mean, it's 4x in value, nearly 4x in value since the beginning of us talking about ChatGPT.
If I knew that, I'd be a trillionaire.
I think office hours caused NVIDIA to spike in the market. That's what I'm saying.
It was really painful when I think I've told the story. I invested in this thing called Marketocracy where they give you fake money, $1 million of fake money, and you put stuff into it. And in 2000, I put it into Apple, Adobe, ATI, NVIDIA, and one other one I can't think of right now. It'd be worth $100 million now. I was just
you
like,
blew it.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Mitchell. I didn't have $1 million back then. I was almost homeless. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Looking forward to see what Maxon does with their plugins, and of course to see how much deeper Adobe can go into unifying all of their products together.
Next question.
Hakan Forrest from Stockholm, Sweden, asking suggestions for rundown solutions on a budget. Google Sheets?
So I have to say that the most popular one that we've seen is Google Sheets, and there's Rundown Creator is one you can look at, and there's also one Rundown Creator is the one I'm most familiar with. I think Courtney has it up there, and so that one is. That's one you can look at. I don't know what you're looking at for a budget, but again, what we see the most often is still Google Sheets, because everyone can edit it, everyone has it, everyone can jump into it. They don't have to learn. Rundown Creator is significantly better. Show Flow is the other one. I think it's Show with FLO. So Show Flow and Rundown Creator are the two that you probably want to look at if you want more features than what you see with Google Sheets. But Google Sheets is probably still the most popular one. Next question.
Dave Kaufman, Vancouver, British Columbia. We used to think it was Hans Zimmer soundtracks, but Oppenheimer dialogue was unintelligible in the theater. Listen to 70mm film and digital. Why is dialogue so much harder to hear in modern movies? My hearing is okay.
Yeah. This is the other competitor to theaters is that oftentimes now my family leaves captions on all the time, and going to the theater means that they have to do something without captions. I don't know if there's a lot of resistance there. It's because the director really wants you to be more immersed into the sound effects, and so they're pushing the dialogue more into the bed and to make it more immersive. And it's a directorial choice, and it makes it really hard to understand what people are saying at times. Now, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I have this theory, and your kids may be proving out this theory, Alex, is that people that say they've had a little trouble and they turn on captions, and then they get used to using captions, they become dependent on them. And I have a friend who will not watch TV without the captions turned on.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
And I think you can become totally dependent. Your brain starts translating, and it stops listening when it sees the captions.
Yeah. No, I think
so you lose the ability to interpret audio sound if you become dependent on captions. And so I think a lot of young people are doing that these days because they're used to watching stuff on their phones, and they don't want to have the sound on to disturb other people. So they have captioning on. So they become dependent on reading it instead of hearing it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Go ahead, Mitchell, real quick.
I have an issue with the way actors are also speaking nowadays. It seems like whispering it in, and it's very hard to understand. They just want to feel
more like you're there, and not quite as projected. Next question.
Next question for Douglas Carmichael. How would a digital-first director handle outputting their film to a 1570? Are there facilities that can do that?
Yes. It's a film printer. So there's film printers. Not very many of them, as Courtney has pointed out, but they exist. Next question.
John Fisher, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. As industry insiders, where do you think we are on the bell curve of trying to turn films into cinematic universes?
I don't really know exactly what that means. But I think that, I think that what's going to be really interesting is to see what people do. If you're thinking about immersion, I think that what we're going to probably see is some behind the scenes and some scenes. So people have seen some of these R5Cs and some of the a couple of the Raptors with 180 lenses showing up on film sets. I think what they're going to do is start showing you things where you're still going to watch it all in 16:9, but every once in a while you're going to get a glance of, you can go to something and see something wider, or you can watch certain scenes or certain things happen in 180. The problem is most of the time there's nothing to see outside of the frame. It's like C-stands and stuff like that. So that's, it has to be very certain scenes that can be built that way. But I think that it's going to be, I think you're going to see more of that there. Next question.
From Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. I'm admiring the John Preto set and image quality today. It has always been good, but extra good now. What changed?
Go ahead. I'm going to skip this and go in a little out of order here. Go ahead, John. You can say something, Chris? Go ahead, Chris.
Real quick. What actually happened, Kenny, is that Alex finally released a little budget that we could upgrade John's set. So we sent some people over, got a crew in there, did a little lighting tweaks, and it was just great that Alex would release that budget. Thanks, Alex.
Go ahead, John.
Alex yelled at me back in July and said, if you don't get your act together, you're going to get kicked off the panel. And so That's not true. But I was having a problem with tearing on my Brio.
Yeah.
And so I moved my Sony Alpha, that's the Alpha 7 III camera, over here to my desk. And then I've always had this monitor in the background, but it was on this side. I just moved it over to this side.
It looks very nice.
And then I've got a Keynote. I've got a 200 Diva on top of my head.
Well, it's a huge improvement. It definitely looks great. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Sony, no baloney.
All right, we are jumping into our second hour, and we are now going to be talking about raster versus vector. Rasters and vectors are something that we oftentimes, those are terms that are kind of, and this is a basic, so many of you probably already know what they are, but we can talk about some of the efficiencies and so on and so forth of the two of them. Essentially, it is implicit versus explicit graphics. And so your vectors, and these vectors are related to, your 3D models and many other things, are implicit control, which means that I don't actually, a vector is not something that I am drawing every point. So I'm saying I have that's bad color, hold on. I have a point here and I have a point here. And then what I can do is, using a calculation, I can say, well, I'm going to draw between these and over like this, and I might have another, point over here that is, so I have these points here and I'm drawing that line, but that line is a effect of those points. It is not it is not, I'm not drawing every little dot that goes along here. I'm only drawing the control points here. And the way that those control points are calculated can be a variety of different things. And so, for instance, to draw this line, you may have, this is the control point here, but then I may have the most typical one that you use is a Bezier curve. So, out of this control point, I might have a little Bezier like this and another long Bezier like that. That's probably what that one would look like. And this one would probably look a little bit like this. And essentially, this is the, this is what those would probably look like there. So these are the Bezier curves. This is an endpoint. Now, these curves, they're just these curves here like this. That you want to think of them as, they're really cages. We just get rid of this part here. So that part there has been taken away. And so we have, if we, let me erase that a little bit here. So, if we put that back in here, so this cage, it basically is how we calculate this cage. So by moving this cage around and then translating it, that's what you kind of get there. So anyway, again, if I go here and so let's get rid of this here. So anyway, so you have, this is the basic piece. Now, this is how all of the vector graphics are created. The advantage of this is that the resolution, these final dots here that you see, are being created right when you go to print, right when you go out to video, right when you go out. So no matter how close you get to it, it stays sharp. So it constantly is staying sharp, no matter how much you zoom it up. So you can build something that's the side of a building and it's going to remain sharp. The hard part is that this doesn't work as well when every pixel is different. So the image behind me or a photo or other things do not translate well to vector because they have to be described. They have to be described. So every pixel is slightly different than the other one. That doesn't work for vectors. So typically, what you see are vectors are, things that are like logos and things that are, certain areas that want to be cleaner. When things start to become more organic, then of course you need rasters to, a rasterized image or a raster image. If you want to do pixel effects, so if we want to do layering, oftentimes we need to have, eventually there's some effects you can do with that as a layer, but as you start to do pixel effects like blur, those are what we would call, a convolution kernel is, essentially a convolution kernel is saying, I got a pixel here, and what am I going to do in relationship to the pixels around me, in that kernel, and you can do it as an effect, but you're not really, you generally at some point have to start rasterizing it so that you can do those pixel by pixel adjustments. So we keep a lot of our stuff in vector as long as we can, if they're clean graphics, and then convert them to raster. Now, rasters, of course, are our photos. There are, a lot of our effects that we do are all rasterized. At some point, everything becomes rastered. Like it has to be, we have to know how to put it on a piece of paper. We have to know how to put it on a screen. We have to, so eventually it's going to be rasterized on the way out, but it's but it can start. And if you have something that's vector, oftentimes you want to keep it vector as long as you possibly can, so that you can constantly be changing that resolution. So when you save out to something like the kind of file formats that you see that are vector are going to be file formats like SVG, EPS, AI, and the Adobe Illustrator, not AI, artificial intelligence, but Adobe Illustrator. So those are all things. Those are the type of graphic formats. SVG, EPS, and AI are probably the most popular vector formats that you'll see floating around. And then of course, most of the other formats are all raster based. PDF can be a mixture of those things. So PDF can be both. They can have images in it, but it also, if you have things that are in PostScript is a vector. So when you think about PostScript or TrueType, all your text generally is all vector. So it's all being calculated as a vector there. So those are some of the things that those are how those things get translated. That's why it always looks sharp when you're printing out your PDF or zooming into it. But it's much lighter. So typically you're going to have a much lighter file when you're trying to describe it all as descriptions of those things as opposed to every little pixel, because the problem is if you're trying to if you rasterize that file, now you have to have a really high resolution for it to remain sharp. So so the vector saves you a lot of trouble there. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, if you've been doing this stuff for a while, you remember the days where, like for example, in Photoshop, you didn't type words into a frame. You created shapes that looked very much like letters. And so a lot of times we would make graphical elements much larger so that you could scale them down, because you never wanted to have to scale something up because it would break apart. And so, like Alex was saying, I always tell people when I get a vector image like a logo or whatnot, it's infinitely scalable. I can put it on a business card, a letterhead, fill up a wall, the side of a bus, or the side of a planet. It doesn't matter. It's always going to be sharp because it's just math. It's math that scales it up. Learning that, I can remember, 30 plus years ago going, oh, wow, and then the tools get more powerful, and then it becomes trivial to scale things around. But it's a real aha moment when you understand it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that we were talking about when we were talking about the second hours, and I was like, this is something that a lot of folks here are going to know, and this might be a short hour because everyone's going to be like, well, I already know all this stuff. But at the same time, for the folks that haven't seen that, it's an important basic that you really have to know. And I find a remarkable number of people still have trouble with figuring out what to do and when to do it. I mean, the bottom line is that, if you're doing something that's rasterized, from whatever resolution it's at, you really can't scale it up. Like you can't go up. There are tools that will make it slightly better, but it's not ever really going to turn out. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I do a lot of motion graphics work, and invariably I'm handed a logo from a company. And in addition to wanting it to be a vector-based graphic like an Illustrator file or EPS or SVG, the thing we haven't talked about yet is that if you get it as a vector file and it's in Illustrator, you may have layers now that you can deal with. And one of the cool things about animating any logo is that I like to start with a finished logo and decide how it's going to get to that point. And that means I need to be able to pull all these different parts away from the logo in order to be able to animate them. And yes, the scaling is a great thing, but I love the layering ability. And of course, I'm heavily into the Adobe environment. Going between Illustrator and After Effects is just very, very nice.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mitchell, it'd be fun to do a lab or maybe it's a second hour, I don't know, where we take, and this is just for corporate video. This is not, we're not talking about Christopher Nolan making IMAX movies, or just crap corporate video, where you learn how to pull assets in that you scavenge from a client, and then be able to tear them apart, make them into layers, animate them and stuff. What I was going to say is that one of my biggest frustrations is when somebody gives you a logo and it's like a JPEG. It's like, I need this. I need this as an EPS file. They go, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. I'll get my guy on that. And then they send you the JPEG embedded into an EPS wrapper. And it's like, that's not
This is, by the
real.
way, this is why we're having this hour. So that nobody does that.
Just because it says .eps doesn't mean it's a vector image. It's a
and we'll talk a little bit about some automatic conversion processes, but when you're really doing something high end, it is a skill that is worth having. You know, like it's not a because there's, you know, you don't. If you looked at, if I was tracing this is going to be really meta here for me to try to trace myself here, but you know, one of the things that you're looking at is that, you know, you think you're going to put things on the corners here like this, but that's not the way you build this out. You know, you're basically setting your point here and your point here, and then you're putting moving these over so that you can explicitly control that, or implicitly control that edge. And depending on the resolution, you know, this starts to turn into like I got points here, you know, and they're all like these little points that go around that are,
Hold still.
Yeah, exactly. I got to stand still very still while I'm drawing on myself.
Do the hair. Draw the hair.
Yeah, exactly.
Make
and then
the logo bigger.
Yeah. So, but the main thing is that it's a skill set that I don't use as often as I used to. But one of the real powerful things was I had to outline one of my jobs when I was in my early 20s was rebuilding our clients. I did a for a while. I don't know how. I don't think I did it very long. 3 or 4 months. I think I was the production supervisor for I think it was Colorado Horse News. So it turned out, and I did a horse. It was a newsletter, a magazine. It was actually a magazine.
We've all had that job, Alex.
It was good. It was good though. It was all in Cork, and I think what happened was they asked me to design something, and they had this horrible logo, and I was a big Photoshop guy, and I made their logo look like it was on burlap, and it was all like, really, nice layered and everything else. And they were like, would you like to work on the magazine? And I didn't have enough work. So I was like, sure. I had my morning was filled up by doing Prime Sports Network, but my afternoon could be working on this magazine. And I learned how to do automatic flowing and everything else. But one of the big things is if you want to find a place, if you want to find a place where you're going to get a lot of logos that are not EPS or .ai, work for Colorado Horse News because they're all like a picture, or they would just cut it out of their card, or they would cut it out of something, and they just send you these pieces of paper, and I'd scan them and I'd redraw them, and I would and what was really interesting is that at first that was a little rough, but you get fast at it. Take you a half hour to redo someone's logo. And then you would send it back to them and say, hey, you might want to keep this somewhere safe. Like this is an outline of your logo. And it's a really great skill to have. And you get fast at it, and you can look at something and go, okay, I can draw this out. So it's a good skill, but there are programs. The automatic programs are never going to be as clean as someone doing it by hand that knows what they're doing. I've never seen an automatic program. Even we'll talk about Trace Journey, which is probably one of the better ones out there right now. But they're never going to be as clean as someone just doing it. And where clean matters, in you may have something that looks the same, but when you scale it up, you're going to start seeing little hooks, things that are not quite right, and edges that aren't quite have to. What happens is that you think about this curve that's here and here and here, and I'm gonna build these teeters that are like this, and they're like this. And then I'm going to draw this line that goes, through here like this and around like that. The problem is you could build that with more of these. You could put points in here, and this is what an automatic system will do, is put these little points in here. It'll put more of them in there because it's easier for it to manage. And at whatever that resolution is, it makes sense. But as it scales, you're going to start to see little ridges, because it's scaling up, and it's not, this curve wants to be very efficient, because every time you put a point there, it's going to create a corner at some point. At some level, it's going to start creating hitches. And other things you'll get are, so the thing is that when you have extra points and you scale them down, they might start running into each other. So it is being able to do this really cleanly is really important, as a skill. It also means we don't have to worry about this much anymore. But it used to be it would hang if you had inefficient logos that were automatically traced by by Illustrator, for instance. Illustrator has its own automatic tracing stuff, and it used to be a separate app, and I think they put it into Illustrator, I don't know, 15 years ago. So, but I remember it being a separate app that Adobe had, and the challenge there, now I think it might be 25 years ago that they incorporated it. So anyway, but the challenge is that it would hitch up the prepress. So when you sent it out to print and you had a whole bunch of stuff that was automatically, it was too complicated, and it would actually, crash the prepress. So we, you had to be very careful about how you sent those things out. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, to take it back to the origins, the difference between vector and raster came about because of the difference in electronic displays. The original electronic displays were all vector based. You may remember going to the
Tempest.
arcade and playing Tempest or
Asteroids.
One called Tomcat or Asteroids. Those were all vector displays, which were stroke displays. So the game actually calculated all the vectors, all the lines in there, and it used magnetic deflection to move an electron beam from one point to the other using the math. And it wouldn't draw the screen,
which made it much lighter.
Bottom. Right. Yeah. It made it much lighter data wise. So you could do fast moving displays very easily because it had a lot less pixels to light up, because it's just lighting up the pixels that are bright. It's not having to visit the pixels that are dark. And then when we moved on to raster-based displays, which is television, is that anything with a raster that scans from top to bottom, where you have to light up all the pixels at once. And then to get computers moving into raster displays, television was analog. But when computers started to do raster displays, they had to go between the difference. They had to assign a specific color to each square pixel in that raster display. And that's what caused the blockiness of the early raster displays. We also all remember, if you've ever done screen fonts, that's where you see a lot of difference between fonts. These are the original screen fonts on most computers, and you can see how blocky they are. And when you scale them up, the blockiness becomes a real problem. And I remember having to design fonts for computers, and you had 8 blocks horizontally and 14 blocks vertically to make a character. And this became a problem actually in designing. Like the difference between a W and an H is only these 2 pixels here that are across the cross member here, a capital W and a capital H. So when designing teleprompters, we had to use the original character generators, were these 8-bit graphics. And it was really hard to tell the difference between a W and an H. So people would misread words if they're typed in all caps. So as we progressed, we learned to do anti-aliasing, which was a technique derived to fool the eye into thinking that the diagonal lines, which were just block diagonally, so that the jagged edge would be smoothed out by putting other pixels that are the same size and are the same shape, but a different exposure value, brightness value, that would trick the eye into thinking that, it blends that jagged edge into the different color by putting a pixel that is a combination of those 2 colors along the edge, but halfway in between the 2. So anti-aliasing was the big thing that allowed raster images to be scaled up and without seeing a lot of the jagginess along the edge. And it's much easier to convert a vector to a raster than it is to convert a raster to a vector.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Jason.
So raster comes from Latin for rake, and if you think about a picture, no matter how complicated it is, Fenwick's giving me a frown. I didn't make that up. It's a grid of pixels. No matter how it's compressed, no matter how cleverly it's created, it is still finite, and it is still significantly. Alex said that they were lighter, but let me give you an example.
Vector's lighter.
Right, a vector is much lighter. So compared to, you can create a vectorized drawing that is the size of a postage stamp and scale it to the size of the Rose Bowl, dome, and it's going to be the same size image. Like, just think about that for a second. That is really the magic here. Also, I really learned that the gradients when you're using them with vectors is just incredible. And the people that are really good with logos, it's kind of like you can tell the people that are good with Photoshop because they only have to touch it like twice. You could tell that somebody is really good at vectors when they're using like 2 or 3 control points. They've got this gorgeous, perfect, incredible, symmetrical curve. That's it's really a skill.
And we're not talking about today, but when you think about it in 3D, when you start talking about subdivision surfaces and NURBS and those types of, and those type B-splines, those are all the same thing. I mean, they're the same type of calculations, just to add in another dimension. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
And first one in from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. What is the best way to convert a low-quality raster image into a vector image for upsizing?
Go ahead, Chris. Can't hear you, Chris.
Sorry about that. Hey, so I was just playing with this, and low quality. What I did is I took my camera shot, right there, and I ran in Illustrator. I opened it up in Illustrator. Illustrator calls it image trace, and I was actually able to create the whole thing as a raster. I believe I can then ungroup bits of it. And I think that means, yes, I can now grab and pull parts of it away. So that's one way.
And can you zoom in on your face there? Whoop.
Yeah, I can. Let's see. Zoomed in on my selection. Give me a second. It's okay.
Right. Yeah, because it has to start making decisions. Like it's starting
yeah, and it's there's a lot of great. Look at the gradient in the background over here.
Right.
But each one of these things is a separate thing.
Right.
It's crazy.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, as Courtney said earlier, it's much easier to go from vector to raster than raster to vector because of all those artifacts, and that gets very complicated when you get a raster image trying to be a vector, because it's either going to posterize the object, like Chris posterized is a scary thought, or some other issues will come up. I prefer just to use a raster-based amplification program that does quadrilateral Bini Boomba cubic interpretation. And sometimes I get a better result from that. At least it's still a raster. At least it still looks organic.
Yeah, for a basic logo, the best way to do a basic logo is by hand. Like it's just to trace it. If have a skilled operator trace it. And by the way, this is a excellent thing to use something like Fiverr for. I have found that it won't cost you $5. It'll cost you more, but you can send an image out to someone on Fiverr, and for $35, $40, they'll send you back a pristine EPS. When I learned I could do that, I don't know where they are. But wow, it's just perfect. And they obviously, this is all they do, is just trace people's logos. And they'll come back in great layers and everything else that's needed to be done. So
they seem to be able to simplify it and make it, instead of being more complicated. And
that's where the skill comes in.
The skill, but so the best way to do it is have a person who knows what they're doing trace it. Like that is the best way to do it. The fastest way to do it is to use probably something like Illustrator's Trace. The one that I've been playing with a fair bit of success is Trace Journey. Trace Journey is like Mid Journey, except that it's Trace Journey, and I think you can even do Mid Journey templates in it. But you can just drag an image into Trace Journey, the Trace Journey bot, like you'd have a Mid Journey bot, and say trace that, and it'll create an SVG of it, and it does a pretty good job. The big problem you get into with auto tracing is that they don't layer very well. It's doing the same thing with Chris's. It's like there's a whole bunch of little patches there, but what do you do with that? Other than having the image, if you ever want to manipulate it or move it or whatever, it's not a clean, it's not a clean image because it doesn't know what it's looking at. Now, I think this will get a lot better. So when we watch something like Trace Journey get better, it's going to start knowing this is the foreground, this is the background, this is the text, this is the, these tools are going to get really good. So I do think that there is a future for AI tracing that isn't quite here yet, but it's coming, because this is definitely something that's very manual. and eventually could figure out that Chris is, especially if you gave it an iPhone, with depth information and handed it to it, its ability to build a trace out of that would be pretty high of understanding what the objects are. But right now, Chris can show you. Chris can, if we cut to Chris there for a second, you'll see this kind of, it's just kind of a bit garbly-gook.
Yeah, this is just madness. And it doesn't help that I'm wearing a dark sweatshirt on a dark background.
Right.
Like when I pick this thing over here, oh no, that actually didn't get any on my sweatshirt. Yeah. Yeah. This is something I own. Whatever.
It's the auto tracing will get better, but today it's still better to do it yourself if you really want something you're going to use all the time, especially as a logo. The other thing is that a lot of times one of the advantages of your vector. One of the advantages of your of a vector is you can also extrude it. So if you have a logo and you want to extrude it out into a 3D object, or break it apart, and a lot of times what we do is someone will send us a logo, and we'll grab different elements out of that logo. We'll separate them all out into layers, and then we'll take them into. I used to take into Pro Animator or Invigorator, but you can do it in a variety of different apps now. You can even and you can extrude it. You can extrude all of that out into a 3D model. You can even, one of the uses, there's a limitation in motion. Motion does text, and one of the things that we started doing is using text creation tools or typography tools to convert our logos to text, so that A is a Acme logo and B is something else. And then you can bring it into motion and extrude it out automatically to have your logos extruded out. So those are, but extrusion is necessary, and that's another thing that vectors are good for. And so we convert them, but they have to be clean. Otherwise, the 3D models aren't going to come out clean. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the problem with doing what you asked for in the question is converting a low quality raster image into a vector image. Is a raster to vector converter will do if it's good, will do an accurate job of following every edge in that low quality raster. So it will create vectors that are blocky, they go across here and down here and across here and down here and across here and down here, rather than drawing a single vector line to indicate a diagonal. And then when you upsize it, it'll look just as bad or probably worse than just upscaling the original raster. One way to avoid all this is to just have a image that only has squares in it, that has no diagonals and no curves. Like if I scale this color bars up, I can scale it up in any dimension, and you don't see any artifacts, even though that's originally just a bitmap, because of course all the pixels are being just multiplied. And when you scale or multiply them, the edges are always the edges, vertical and horizontal, because the pixels are square and the lines are square. So as long as the lines line up with the pixel edges, you don't have a problem with scaling. It's when you get diagonals and curves that the problems exist.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've done to sometimes handle that is to scale the image up a lot, blur it just a little bit, and then scale it back down again. You may lose some resolution around the corners that you might have to fix, but if you want to scan it or have it, that's one way sometimes to fix some of it. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than blocks. Next question.
Next question from David Brady in New York, New York. I use Pixelmator Pro instead of Photoshop and Illustrator, as it handles both well enough for my needs. Prove me wrong.
If it works well enough for your needs, then keep using it. I think that it's, I think that, again, like the Trace Journey bot and a lot of these other ones are definitely there. I think that when I go Pixelmator Pro, and I use Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer, which are very similar to Pixelmator Pro. I have Pixelmator Pro as well. I think that the big reason that I end up going back to Photoshop, well, other than the generative AI in the beta, but the older Photoshop is mostly because I've been using Photoshop since 1981, and so I just know how to do the operation really quickly. So usually when I go back, I feel like I probably could have done this in Affinity or Pixelmator. I just don't know how, and I just go back to it. And I try to keep on forcing myself to do as many. The interfaces are a little quirky, but I think if you get used to it, you can. The big missing piece, which is not really part of this discussion, for Pixelmator and Affinity is no alpha channels. Like you don't have explicit alpha channels, and it drives me, like, as a Photoshop user, no alpha channels is really difficult. Like not being able to stack up alpha channels and be able to use those and explicitly manage those is really difficult. So they, and that's been the thing that's the number one thing that gets me back to Photoshop is I need to do something that's a channel operation. Next question.
From Javier Alfaro in Mexico City, Mexico, is there an AI service that directly creates vector images? Or what is your preferred workflow to generate vector images using AI prompts?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, Adobe's already announced text to vector as part of Firefly. It's not released yet. It's an alpha. Hopefully they show it at SIGGRAPH, but it will be part of the Adobe suite.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asking, are 2D vector graphics sometimes used as a guide for 3D artists to extrude and create 3D objects?
And we talked about that a little bit in passing, but absolutely. We probably do a whole second hour on extruding and things to think about. That's probably a great topic for a Tuesday, is extruding 3D, building 3D graphics from text and from logos and so on and so forth. So I think that, we absolutely, that's what you need to take a logo out is, and preferably a logo that is well built in, it's got good layering, so that all the different elements that you want, that's usually the first thing that you do is you open it up in Illustrator, or you open it up in Designer, or you open it up in Photomator or Pixelmator, sorry. And you get all the layers exact. I want this layer and then this layer and then this layer, and I want to control these bits and pieces. And then you take it in and you start extruding the pieces one at a time. Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Type is a good example. I like to set type in Illustrator. I'm a little old-fashioned that way. And then all you have to do is copy it and paste it inside of After Effects and apply. There's a 3D program, Element 3D, that will instantly take that information and put it into a mask and allow it to be 3D animated. Also, you mentioned Vigurator, Zach Stow's great program. Really cool vector graphics, especially if you're dealing with type. Has a huge number of examples and colors, and just a quick way to get stuff done.
Good, Courtney.
Well, all computer-aided design programs like AutoCAD and Tinkercad and anything designed to create a 3D object like a building or any product or object or case for something is all in vector. You see it on a raster display, so it rasterizes those vectors for the display. That's part of the display driver for that particular program. But all of CAD programs, because they have to be very precise down to 1,000th of a millimeter. If they worked in raster, they wouldn't be very accurate. If you scaled it up to the size of a building, you'd have jagged edges on your doors and things. So they all work in vector graphics to begin with. Yep. So Adobe Illustrator and AutoCAD, any of the CAD programs are all vector-based design programs, and that start with primitives.
Yeah, one of the tricks to extruding logos and text that the programs that are specifically designed for it is corners. So corners are really tricky, and especially very convex corners can be very, very, like if it's a hard edge. How do you count the thing that really sets things apart is you can extrude those straight out, and that's fine. But as you start adding rounding to them or bevels, how does it calculate those corners that's the real where a good extruder is sets itself apart, is managing those areas that are extruded and then rounded. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I just decided I wanted to see how far I could push this just with white and gray. So took my logo and did nothing but mixes of whites and extrude, smooth. And before I do it, I had this insanely large thing in Photoshop. But in Illustrator, it was like 5 megabytes, and that can infinitely scale. And yeah, corners and round things are really tricky.
Here you go, Chris.
Mitchell, did you say you could copy your layer of text out of Illustrator and paste it into After Effects?
Absolutely. You can do it as a layer or as a mask. It takes that. Right.
Is it still editable? Or is it?
You can edit back. Yeah, you can. You can convert to splines and do a little work within it. So yes.
Oh, okay. So what I usually do when I'm doing that, sorry, this little tutorial here, is I would actually just create a graphic, a file that I can always go back to, place that into Illustrator, After Effects, so that if I go edit the file, that change will ripple all the way through.
That's true.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Because I'm always dealing with people that are changing their minds.
Exactly, and that was one of the big things with Pro Animator from Zach's DAO from Zach's Works was you give it all those layers and it would just automatically just build you a bunch of layers and you could really quickly move them all in and out. I mean, it was a pretty magic. It still is a pretty magical piece of software. Next question.
Dave Kaufman from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. The trend over time has been to defer rendering vector graphics to raster as late as possible. Can you imagine broadcast ever sending raster and vector together?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't think it's necessary because that little thing called aliasing works fine with the rastering. I mean, in the early days of broadcast with standard def, there were a lot of tricks for type, for example, to make it not fall apart and get ratty. I mean, Chiron Corporation did a lot of interesting things with shadows and doubling up backgrounds, but I don't think it's so much of an issue anymore.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, back when images were drawn on a CRT with an electron beam, where it's just a one-dimensional beam, so it's a dot that's drawing it. In fact, that oscilloscope that is over Alex's right shoulder is a dual beam oscilloscope, and it's one of the very rare ones. Formerly residing in my shop, and it actually displays two vector displays on top of each other because it has two electron guns at the back that generate two independently scanned beams. So it could be done in mixing. I don't know if you mix raster and vector, but at least mixing two vectors was possible.
Yeah, and you do see that. So if you're seeing Unreal Engine being used, or you're seeing some of the ROS graphics that do the AR, you're seeing basically vectors right up until the last minute, and then they're being rendered, in real time. So any kind of real time renderer is taking vector graphics. VizRT is another solution that will do that, where and Chiron has its own version of that. But basically, that's all 3D, and that's all. It is all vector graphics just in 3D that are converted right at the very moment that they're being generated. And so they're being rendered in real time. So Unreal Engine is doing exactly what you're talking about. The challenge that you see there is that they're rendering at the resolution of the screen oftentimes, because that's what the hardware is. And so they can't anti-alias it, or that, anti-aliasing from 3D typically comes from oversampling. So basically what you do is if you need a 1080, you render at 4K or 8K, and then you scale it down, and using the bicubic interpolation, it will just soften those edges and create the grays that Courtney's talking about. And so those little grays are created automatically from the oversampling, because I'm going from a large image to a small image, and those grays just get built automatically through bicubic interpolation, or some other version of interpolation, but bicubic's the most common. And so the only time you can hang on to those aliases if you really want them, by using nearest neighbor. And so anyway, so that's the that's how those calculations done. So it is being used right now in areas, but oftentimes you can see it, because if I see real-time graphics with Unreal, I often look I look at all the curved edges, and I look at all the angled edges, and I see if I see aliasing going on, which you usually see just a little of right now. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana, ask, what resolution should you rasterize to for the best looking curves in 4K video? When is it not worth using the extra pixels?
I mean, if I was going to rasterize to that, usually what I'll do is I'll rasterize at 4 times the resolution, and then I will scale it down. Now, sometimes I'll scale it down to use it. So if I'm going to create the raster, I create it higher. I'll tell you, the little trick is that if you go up to 4 times the resolution of whatever you're going to output, when you scale it down and you play with the interpolation of how it's being scaled, bicubic or a variety of the other ones, you get this. It's hard to describe, but it feels like print. It has the anti-aliasing becomes very, very high quality, and it feels heavier than when you use it with a direct, pixel for pixel conversion. And a lot of times Photoshop will have smoother or sharper, and it's doing what I'm talking about. It's oversampling and then bringing it back down automatically. But what I like to do is do it myself. So I'll put out an image really, really big, and then I'll scale it down. Now, sometimes I'll save it that way, but you'll find that the anti-aliasing that's created from that, if you're going to that raster, oftentimes looks, it's kind of hard to put your finger on, but it just has a really, really nice edge that feels very physical. Next question.
From Michael Graves in Houston, Texas, what is the modern-day equivalent of Adobe Streamline? It was ages-old tool for making a vector from a raster image.
Illustrator. Illustrator is the modern streamline. That's the app I was trying to remember. I was like, there was an app that used to be out, and it was Streamline was what Adobe made that eventually just got incorporated into Illustrator. So yeah, Illustrator is a replacement for that. Next question.
From Kent King in Charlotte, North Carolina, we do a bunch of color matching for logos and have relied on Pantone for 25 plus years, but we've heard rumors Adobe is no longer going to support Pantone. Have you guys heard anything?
Yeah, I have heard. So Pantone is increasing their the licensing. So Pantone wants more money for their colors, and there is a rumor that Adobe is going to not relicense it, not re-up it, and build their own or use something else. And it'll be really interesting to see how that little fight goes. Pantone is so Pantone's not really an Illustrator thing or a vector versus raster, but it's a color management process so that you knew what that color is. And so you literally have these little pieces of paper, and you'd open them up and you'd say the Pantone, G8364 or whatever is this brown.
Swatch book.
It's a swatch book, yeah, swatch. And so you'd have these swatches, and you'd make decisions based on those. But it meant that if you have a managed printing pipeline, if you put that Pantone in on Photoshop, it was going to come out the other end. And in Illustrator, a lot of times what we would get is logos, and those logos say, this red is Pantone this and this, and it was just a way that we always knew that we're using the right color that's being managed in a managed color pipeline. We're using the right color to come out the other end correctly. If everyone's following the same set of rules, you're going to get the color that you expect. Pantone, I think, feels like they've cornered that market, and I think they need more money. So they have upped the licensing, and a lot of people are pulling back a little bit. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I don't stay in the Pantone workflow, because if a client gives me and says, this must be Pantone 256, I'll take it, then convert it to RGB or whatever else I'm working with. And Pantone has really been for the old pre-flighting for print work, doing less and less print, more and more graphics. So for me, it's not a problem if they get rid of them.
Yeah, it's just always been something that it's a known quantity for everybody, and as and it's people still printing stuff, and again, it's a hard one to move away from, but it does sound like a couple folks are this happened a couple months ago. I think that the Pantone started talking about higher licensing fees, and that's what's kind of pushing this forward. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, is Snow White rasterized and Toy Story vectorized? Will today's gaming kids prefer the vectorized animations of their youth?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't know about the preferences. Well, Snow White was hand-drawn, so it's the original analogs. There was no raster or vector involved, no math normally, unless they use a protractor to design some curves or something when they drew it. And it was hand-painted, so all the edges had to do with brush strokes than ink strokes on the cells. Then Toy Story worked with a vector-generated characters that were then rasterized and painted as they, lit them and painted them in the final version at the resolution that they were going to release it at. But it was Toy Story is also vectorized, but it's not as analog. Although they do, I guess you could say it's kind of analog because they're drawing on tablets, which is taking the stroke of the artist or the pencil sketches of the artist and then converting it to vectors and then rendering it to raster.
Yeah, I just saw recently that someone took AI and they analyzed and they did a whole episode of South Park without any editing. They literally just gave it to the AI. It wrote it, it animated it, it edited it, everything else. It wasn't very good. Like they said, it's just as good as a South Park. And I was like, is it? is it? But you are going to see some more vector-based stuff like that related to AI as well. Next question.
Kent King in Charlotte, North Carolina asks, what's the preferred Illustrator file format now? It was EPS, but now macOS no longer shows a preview in the Finder. Looking for best option that works from simple to complex vector art, retaining Pantone spot colors when placed in other apps.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I work on Macs if I'm doing any design work, and illyfiles.il or whatever, they seem to work the best. I don't generally go to EPS, and if I do, you have to be careful of what version of Illustrator it's generated for, because I think the standard that everybody can still receive is Illustrator 5. I think that's the one if you want to be very compatible.
I think it's 6. I think
it might be 6,
yeah.
but now I'm kind of been doing this a long time, so 5 seems to stick in my head. But
right.
I just find that I can get all those previews and nice things, and even if you're going over to EPS, it still will bring over the proper color balance if you're going to sRGB or 709 or whatever the case may be, or Pantone even.
Yeah, I mean, I now export everything out in 4 formats. So, and I have to look, I haven't really tried the Pantone one with SVG, but so I'm exporting, if I'm doing something in Illustrator, I'm going to export an Illustrator file, an EPS file, version 6. I'm going to export an SVG file and a PDF. And so those are the 4 that I'm going to output, and I'm going to put them in a little folder. And that means that I don't, and usually I'll put out a TIFF file, that's going to be there. But the idea is I just want to put out a little folder that has all those pieces in it, because I don't know where it's going to go. I think SVG is kind of the heir apparent. That's what, there's more and more support for. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, or EPS. Acrobat is probably a program that you could use to rasterize most of those vector-based files, because it's used to doing it. There used to be Windows. In the Windows world, we used to have Windows Metafile format, which was a vector-based file format. But they deprecated that about 10 or 15 years ago. And now if you try and find a program that can load a Windows Metafile, WMF file, which was the file extension, it's really, really hard to find something that'll even display those these days. Well, there was a lot of clip art that was done in Windows Metafile because it could be scaled infinitely and printed out on high-resolution printers without artifacts, but it is no more. Adobe kind of took over that market with the AI.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the AI .ai I think is going to Adobe, as Adobe goes more into AI. You wonder if they're going to change that suffix. Anyway, but I felt like Apple showed their cards a little bit when they released support for SVG for Keynote. So the last version of Keynote, now supports SVG. So I think that you're going to see Apple kind of move towards, that's where there's a lot of support for those things. But you can see it in PDF, and PDF typically can be opened back in I believe in an Illustrator file with all the bits and pieces still left in there. But I usually, again, I save them out as all of them because I just don't know. And I know I'm creating them right now. And by what I don't want someone to do is convert my file, so I want to go, I've created a source and I want to give the client or the project, here are the different versions that you could use that are all, if that's what you want. And I've opened them and looked at them and made sure that they're what I want them to be. Next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael asking, I remember back in the day when printing to a PostScript NEC Silentwriter printer, Mac OS 6 said, quote, a bitmap version of the font Los Angeles is being downloaded. Please wait, unquote. Is that a vector font converted to a raster font?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
What you're describing in the old days, if you had a PostScript printer, you had to rip. Basically, what that means is that there were 2 fonts that were being looked at. One is the screen font, which was bitmapped, and then there was the PostScript font. And the ripper had to get the PostScript into a raster version in order to print it. I think that's the way it worked. It's been so very, very long. Nowadays, TrueType and other types of fonts, it's all embedded in the same thing.
Next question.
Next question from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What is the replacement app for LiveType? Is there an animated typeface generator app?
Motion. So Motion, it is when as LiveType, it was a titler. I think that I was looking up here. I remember it being called India Titler Pro. But when as Motion came out, it was LiveType. All the tools, pretty much all the tools are, I think, that you saw with LiveType should be available inside of Motion. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, is vector illustration a solid precursor skill for learning 3D modeling?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I would say no, because you can do a lot of that type of modeling inside most of the 3D programs out there, like Cinema 4D. You can do quite a bit of animation, typesetting, things like that. It doesn't require that you start in Illustrator to get it there. So less and less.
Yeah, I would say that understanding how vectors work in a 2D environment is very valuable. And then you'll still add those, but understanding how they're working, and then it just goes to 3D. There are so many things that I still use that skill set that I learned 30 years ago. I would highly recommend. I mean, a great thing to do if you're just trying to train is to trace some logos or trace some things and figure those out. There's a lot of, when I work with artists that are newer, that didn't do the kind of the hard work that a lot of folks did, you do find that they get limited and they do really weird things because they don't understand how to do that basic thing. I mean, this is in many industries when someone comes in without a lot of the, more constrained resources, is that they don't know how to do the things that the old fogies like us know how to do. So I think that there's a real value to understanding it. I think being able to trace with B-splines is something. You don't have to spend years doing it, but a couple weeks of doing it is probably useful. A couple hours a day for a couple weeks was probably watching it and studying it a little bit is a worthwhile skill. Next question.
John Fisher from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma asks, do you only import vectors into Keynote as SVG files?
Back in the day, when I say back in the day, a couple years ago, there was this weird little app that someone wrote, and you always felt like, is this really going to take over my computer and, ruin it or something like that? But there was a weird little open source app that someone wrote that would convert Illustrator files into shapes. It would create a Keynote file with the shape in it. And so we used to move things that way over, and it was really painful. And you always wondered who was going to keep updating this program. And it was just someone's hobby that they posted. And now that SVGs are out, that's the way to bring it in. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the app was called AI to Key, right? Yeah. AI, the number 2, and then Key. And it was just a lifesaver for those of us that love Keynote. And I hope he has a happy retirement because it served its purpose.
I think it was free. I think it was just like he does whatever he's doing, totally and he just threw it up there for people to use, and it was super useful. I cannot believe it took Apple this long to get a way to bring in shapes. The advantage of shapes. So people will go, well, you could have brought a PDF in or EPS before that, and that's true. But Apple didn't treat it as a shape. And so the advantage of treating it like a shape is that you can now do fill colors. So if you brought in an EPS file, it would just be there. But you can't say fill that with blue or fill that with red. So if you're working on something, you couldn't do anything with it. It was still sharp, infinitely scalable. So it did have all those tools, but it wasn't treated as a shape, and you couldn't put it in your shape library. So like in my Keynote, I have all these shapes that I would import. I have there's a satellite truck and there's a satellite and I bought those, on, I don't know, iStock or whatever. And then I import them all into, I am using the AI to Key. I brought those all in as shapes, and then I put them into my shapes inside of Illustrator, inside of Keynote, so I can just go grab them. But I can also change their colors so they match whatever the presentation I have is. Now I can do that with SVG, and it's useful. Next question.
From Neil Avelado in Boca Raton, Florida. May you explain how to use motion to create the countdown clock?
I've done that in the past. I don't know if I can explain it we don't have that much. We have time. But let's see if we can come back. We'll go to Dave Kaufman, and I'll try to open up motion. We'll see if we can't figure this out if we'll spend the last couple minutes doing this. Anyway, go ahead. Next question.
Dave Kaufman, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. If this is really a cage match of vector versus raster, it looks like raster is the king, with several billion raster cameras and displays, and vector as the only way to create and transfer graphics.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't know. It depends. I mean, on your application and your workflow, everything starts to me in vectors. I mean, 99% of the time. So I wouldn't call it a king in that instance. But once it goes out to broadcast, of course, it's raster is the way to go, and that makes it, I guess, the king.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Unless, of course, you're talking about laser displays. If you're using lasers to draw images on the side of a building or something, they may still operate in vector graphics because they can give a brighter image faster by just using vector XY deflection and a galvanometer, which is two little mirrors at right angles to each other that control the horizontal and vertical deflection of that laser beam. So depends on the display, but since we moved to discrete pixel displays, in other words, LCD displays, where each pixel, instead of a scanned electron beam determining the resolution, which was really infinite, to fixed pixel size, which is what we have on all our displays these days with LCD and plasma and everything else that is individual pixels, a certain count of pixels per horizontal line and certain per vertical line. Everything pretty much has to be converted to raster to display these days. So although you may design in vector, you're going to end up in raster eventually, unless you're projecting lasers on the side of a building.
All right, we're going to see if I can do this in 5 minutes, and we'll see if I can actually pull this off there. So let's. I'm going to go ahead to let's see. Let's make sure.
Here's where the real cage match begins.
Yeah, exactly. So here's
Lindsay versus 5 minutes to explain something complex.
So anyway, so I'm going to take this object. I'm going to go into generators. I'm going to go into text generator, and I'm going to go into time code. So here's my time code here. I can go over to inspector, properties. So I'm actually not actually text generator. Format, and I'm going to make it, I can go into the appearance here, format. Usually I practice this, and so it looks a little better, so I'll make it a little bit bigger. And then what I'm going to do is, there's a couple things that you want to do with these. You want to set it to monospace so it doesn't bounce around, and then that's going to spread out, so then you're going to pull that back in. That way they don't move around, they stay in the same spacing. You go back to the generator and you turn off current time code so that you can set it where you want it. So this is let's see, this is 5 seconds long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to 5, and it might be a little inaccurate, but we'll just set it here. I set a keyframe, and I go to here, and I set this to 0. And then so now you can see it there. So now I have a keyframe. So now you'll see that countdown clock, moving. Now it's got the extra frames. We'll deal with that in a second. So now I have the countdown clock itself that's there. I can go back to the format, and I can say, this is, I can change this. Now I'll have to change all that tracking every time I do this, but this is a aerial round. It's kind of cute. So we'll leave it there. So now it's counting down. I can also, inside of here, if I go into the appearance, I can also play with, let's see if I can go in here and aerial round, regular. That's all I have access to. So I'll go to appearance. I can also say I want 3D text. So there's my 3D text. So now it doesn't look like much here, but if I go to multiple here, it will, then I go back to single, I go to multiple. There's a display error here that I've run into for some reason here. Let's see. It should, when I have multiple here, this is a new, let's see, maybe turn this off and then on. There we go. There's a weird display error that I found there. Anyway, so now I can go in here and say, I want the front bevel to be something else. So I might say I want it to be metal, gold. So here you can see now. So now I've got this, and I can still, and I can decide how deep I want to make it, there. I can go back into the format and make this text even bigger. And remember, it's in 3D text, but it's still all, still counting down, So now the other part that you want to get rid of is that now you go up to the group and you say, I want to build a mask. So you'll say, I'll do a rectangular mask, and then I'm just going to draw this mask over to here. And now now you want to go through it to make sure it doesn't show up anywhere, but there's your countdown clock. And so that's and now you can layer that, move that around and layer it to over top of whatever you want. And you still have a lot of control. You might have to make some fine adjustments to things if you change what text it is. So usually you want to figure that out first. But I build, I built a lot of those. So obviously.
But wouldn't you say that's not technically not vector or raster? It's programmatic in terms of what you're laying
it's a
out.
3D. It's vector because it's a 3D vector. There it started off with a vector. The only reason I can extrude it like that, and again that so that's how I build countdown clocks. And so I get the client's font. I put it in there. I may make it 3D, usually not, and then I can build that really quickly with that keyframes. I literally think that $50 for motion one time ever, like you pay $50 and they just keep upgrading it, is worth it just to build countdown clocks because I build a lot of them. And so anyway, that's but that's how I build countdown clocks in motion. And you can do the same thing. You can do it in Illustrator. It's a little more cumbersome. Last time I used to do all of them in Illustrator. I'm not Illustrator. I used to do them all in After Effects. Yeah. And when I figured out this, it was funny. I was trying to figure this out, and I was doing something convoluted, like I was rendering it out and then reversing it and everything else. I was talking to Mark Spencer, and he's like, "Why don't you just set the keyframes for the time?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know that was possible." So anyway, that's how you build those. It'd be great if Apple got rid of those two ends, so I didn't have to build a weird mask. But it seems like it would be one more thing to do. Anyway. Thank you so much to the panelists for the great conversation. Got us through the first hour and the second hour. Good conversation. I sometimes crib these basics, and I'm like, I don't know if we're going to get through a whole hour, but we did. And it was a good conversation. A great roundtable. Some historical stuff mixed in with some technical. It was good. And thanks to our producers who are asking all the great questions, making this possible every single day. And we can't do this without your questions. And so get them in early. I like to sound smarter. That's the big thing. It's really, and so we sound smarter when you put those questions in a little bit earlier. It gives us some time to see them, but definitely feel free to keep on adding them during the hour as well, especially in the second hour. It's good because you're reacting to what we're talking about there. And then, of course, thanks to the incredible crew, the planning crew, the tech, the development crew, the production crew, that it's all making this possible every single day. This little village that shows up. It's so nice to see everybody. For those of you watching, there's this whole crew that's working on the pre-show, and you walk in, they're making sure that your audio is good and your comms work, and that you've got all your stuff where they need to be. And so it's really fun to see everybody there. It's quite a system. So anyway, thank you all for the contribution that you make for the show. The show happens because we make it happen as a group together, which is kind of an amazing thing. We traveled 58,000 miles, 94,000 kilometers, and that is 466 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. I was very nervous about trying to do the thing live. I was like, this is a bad idea. I'm going to do it anyway.
This is a bad idea. I think I'll do it.
You can always clip the end of the show.
Don't forget to join us for the show workshop today at 12 Pacific and 3 Eastern.
Yes.
The vector.
After Hours.
Oh, and Josh put it in there, and I just skipped over. I was quickly looking down for the Tlaloc. What's the vector?
Roger Dodger.
Hosted by the vector director himself.
The vector director.
I think we should do a corporate video graphics show. Like how to animate bullet points.
Make the logo
tear
bigger.
apart a motor.
What's the logo, Shlomo?
Yeah, that sounds good.